The Mariners roster might not be as locked in as we thought earlier this week. We'll tell you why coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link as well as our social accounts is in the description below. On the show today, we have some information coming out of Peoria regarding the health of Tommy La Stella and the possibility of the Mariners trading one of their starting pitchers before opening day. And you know us, we've never claimed to be news breakers. We don't really have sources too often. We don't typically leak information. That's not really our MO, but we do get information from time to time. And one of our trusted sources that we do occasionally get information from messaged me earlier this morning and gave me some interesting tidbits of information. So we're going to go over that on today's show. So let's start with Tommy La Stella here. Of course, we're about a week removed from when La Stella's elbow injury was first reported. He was supposed to be in the Mariners lineup on the spring training opener against the San Diego Padres last Friday, but was, of course, removed due to an elbow injury, and we haven't seen him since, and we haven't really heard anything about him since. But I'm being told that he's still very much in pain. He's tried to swing the bat a little bit, and it's hurting him when he's been trying to swing. And even when he was healthy and swinging, I've been told that the Mariners field staff hasn't been very impressed with what they've seen. Apparently, the Achilles injuries that he's suffered in the past are still kind of ailing him a little bit as well. He's just not 100% all together here. So, Colby, we're going to talk about how this impacts guys like Colin Moran and Cade Marlowe, et cetera, in a bit. But first, I want to get your reaction just to this information here that La Stella is not doing so hot right now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer. We know that Jerry and the front office have really liked La Stella for a while now. This is their second attempt to get him, and this time they landed him. At least second. Maybe there was another one we don't know about. But yeah, and when you look at what he's done when he's healthy, it makes sense, right? This is a guy who doesn't strike out. He puts the ball in play a ton. He's got some doubles power, some good, on-base skills and stuff like that. Like there's some legitimate upside in the bat. Unfortunately, injuries have just kind of been the story of his entire career. And now it kind of looks like the last couple of injuries he suffered has maybe ended his major league career. We'll wait and see. I certainly don't want to say that Tommy La Stella's done, but the fact that, he's can't swing the bat right now, and that's literally his only path to the big leagues is to be able to swing the bat. That's troubling. And while he does have a few more weeks, you can't, if you're the Mariners, you can't just wait around for Tommy La Stella to feel like he can start hitting. You're going to get to a point of critical mass where he's going to be so far behind from the time missed that you just have to move on. The good news is that while the Mariners did give him a major league contract, it was on the league minimum. So they have there's no restrictions whatsoever for moving on from La Stella. If they feel like they need to, they should, and they shouldn't wait. So it's a bummer because La Stella had a shot to be kind of a solid, 100, 110 WRC plus guy at the bottom of your lineup, get on base, make a lot of contact type of player, but it just doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. Like you said, pre-injury, even elbow injury, the Mariners field staff, not all that impressed with La Stella at the plate. And now obviously if you can't swing, you can't fix, the problem. So it's just not a great sign that Tommy La Stella is long for the big leagues even.
I mean, the thing that's really concerning to me and the thing that really jumped out to me was I was told verbatim, Scott Service knows that Tommy La Stella is washed.
Yeah.
So that's not a good sign for his chances of making the team. Ultimately, this is up to Jerry Dipoto, right? But Service and company not being impressed at all, and essentially thinking that he's done.
Right.
That that to me, we did put him in our 26-man projections the other day. After hearing this, he's out for me. Just if Service and company feel that way about him, then it's over. That's a wrap.
Right. It's worth noting that it's not solely Scott's call. It's also not solely Jerry's call.
Mm,
There is a collaborative effort. Everything that happens in the baseball decision side of things is a
mm,
collaborative effort. If Jerry put his foot down and said we're going to make La Stella work, then he probably would be on the opening day roster, assuming he's healthy even.
mm,
But that's just not quite how it works, right? It's a very
right.
collaborative effort. They work together. Scott and Jerry trust each other, and if Scott is telling Jerry and Justin that like this guy just doesn't have it, like we need to look elsewhere, they're more than likely going to be inclined to believe believe Scott and Jerry's a baseball guy, former player. Justin's obviously very smart, so those guys can watch the same thing that these two guys watch and come to a decision. But I would say, yeah, based on what we know now, the odds of La Stella making this team are basically zero at this point.
So I asked, in follow up, if this meant, Colin Moran was the biggest benefactor from this news, or maybe Cade Marlowe, or maybe this meant a trade or something like that. And I got a couple of pretty interesting answers on that. So we're going to go over that in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything, like the Raptors at -2 against the Wizards. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And once again, a reminder that we are now on Instagram and TikTok. Follow us at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners, on both platforms. We're planning on posting content on both platforms throughout the season. All right. So again, I asked our source here in follow up, who this benefited the most, who they thought this benefited the most. Moran, Marlowe, what were they hearing? Or, maybe were they hearing about a potential for a trade or something like that? We're going to get into that last bit a little later on here, but let's talk about Moran and Marlowe. I was told that this team really is impressed with Cade Marlowe, specifically the Mariners field staff. Guys like Scott Service are very impressed with Cade Marlowe. Hearing things like there's legit 60, 70 grade speed here with Marlowe, which is, of course, the reputation that Marlowe has kind of built for himself over the last couple of years. But to hear that kind of being confirmed by the Mariners coaching staff is certainly something here. And Marlowe's had a pretty decent start to the spring. It hasn't been fantastic by any means, but he's had a couple big moments. I think he has one or maybe even two home runs at this point. He has a triple, bases clearing triple. So he's had a pretty good start to the spring here. So I mean, part of La Stella's appeal, at least when you look at him at face value, at least for us, I don't know how the team viewed him, but for us on the outside, it was like, well, La Stella can play a little bit in the infield. But do you think that even for someone like Marlowe, who is exclusively an outfielder, that this could benefit him, that La Stella not making this roster could benefit someone like Marlowe and actually give him an opportunity to make this roster?
Sure, because now you also have the DH, right? Is kind of open, and we know that the Mariners want to rotate guys through the DH, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have, a primary guy or somebody who plays there a lot. And having Marlowe on your roster could allow somebody like Teoscar Hernandez to DH a few more days, which is beneficial to obviously Teo and also the Mariners because Marlowe's going to be better defensively in a corner. The defensive outfield of Marlowe in left, Julio in center, and Kelnick in right is probably about as good as the Mariners could hope for at this stage. But yeah, so I can understand why you want the backup infield ability, but if you're already going to carry Dylan Moore and Sam Haggerty on this roster, if you're going to carry both of those guys, you're covered, right? You don't need another infielder. So La Stella's ability to play the infield, I mean, yeah, it was a nice little bonus, but the Mariners, if the Mariners think Cade Marlowe is ready, they shouldn't, forego giving him those early at bats to carry an extra infielder just because they're worried they can't cover the infield because they can.
Right.
They absolutely can. So I would say, you know, I I think Moran's probably ahead of the curve right now. But Marlowe, obviously, being talked up this much by the field staff, and the kind of spring that we've seen from him so far, are two things that really can't be ignored. And obviously, the injury to Taylor Trammell kind of opens that up even more. So it's I think the infield thing is interesting, but ultimately, I think Jerry and Justin and Scott and Manny Acta and all those guys, they're smart enough to look at it and say, we don't need to carry a guy who can play the infield just to say we can
Right.
carry a guy who we have the infield covered. We just need to take the best bat with us. And maybe if they think that is Caden Marlowe, then great, do it. I think it'll be Moran. I think, there's a little more safety there, but I'm certainly not going to be upset if they carry Cade Marlowe north with them. And if it doesn't work out, it's really not that big of a deal. Marlowe's got 3 options left. He's already on the 40-man, so you don't have to make a 40-man move. It's pretty seamless. It just kind of depends on what do they want athleticism and upside, or do they want kind of the safety of Colin Moran?
Right. Looking at Marlowe's numbers here, just got them pulled up on MLB at bat. 8 at bats so far, 250 average, home run, 3 ribs, and stolen base so far for Marlowe.
How many
pretty
strikeouts?
decent. Doesn't have strikeout numbers on there actually.
That's
so
kind of the big one.
couldn't tell you. Yeah.
Also, quality of pitching matters a lot, and Marlowe. Right. It's tough to say right now.
Who did
right?
he hit his home run against? Can't even remember. It was one of the games that wasn't televised, so
it was the game against Cleveland.
Ah, right.
Or was it Cleveland? They lost 5-1. It was the Angels.
Was it the Angel game that was actually on TV on Saturday?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and by virtue of it being the Angels, we know that the guy he hit the home run off of wasn't any good.
Of course.
So
yeah, naturally. So you've talked about Colin Moran, and Moran's someone that can play some third base, play first base, basically corner and fielder, DH a little bit. You've made the argument for him over Sam Haggerty on this roster, so I kind of feel like for you this is automatic, right? That it's Moran over Marlowe right now for you, but I don't know. You seem to be kind of on board with the Marlowe thing, just hearing you talk right now.
Right. Well, if Scott is convinced that Marlowe's ready to help, if Manny Act is convinced, and if Jerry's convinced, then you kind of give those guys the benefit of the doubt. But
Sure, yeah.
We do know that at least it sounds like their primary concern right now with the infield is they want somebody who could play third base, right? That's kind of what they're looking at, because they do have second base covered. It's Moore and Haggerty can both play a really good second, and shortstop is Dylan Moore. Now we haven't seen Dylan Moore yet. We've seen Haggerty, but we haven't seen Moore. So maybe their concern is actually that, we don't know if Dylan Moore is going to be available for us on opening day.
Good
so
point,
maybe
yeah.
we do need that backup infielder. But then my counterpoint to that would be, well, okay, but you need a backup middle infielder. You need somebody who can play shortstop.
Right.
So yeah, it's tough to know until we see Dylan Moore, until we know that he's like on track to make the opening day roster. We can't dismiss the ability to play the infield as something that's important. But if Demo's going to be out until mid-April, then I think it all but locks Moran in, because at least Moran can play third base, and God forbid, if you have to, you could put Gino at shortstop for a few innings.
Ugh, that did not work out the last time that he played shortstop for the
Only
Reds,
for a couple innings, though. So,
yeah.
But
oh, really? Coming from the guy who just dragged me for saying, "Oh, it's just a game. If you have to, use Colton Wong at shortstop."
Yeah,
or
that's the other thing. You could use Colton Wong. You could use Sam Haggerty. Like, I think if
Help me
like
out here, guys, in the comments. You guys remember that? You guys remember like a week ago when I said that, and
yeah,
this guy next to
oh,
me dragged
a
me
week ago.
mercilessly. Yeah,
Yeah. You need a shortstop, right? But you do need somebody who can play shortstop.
yeah,
If you're only needing an inning or two at the end of a game because JP rolled an ankle or whatever,
sure.
fine, you live with it. But it's not
Yeah.
like you're gonna roll with
Is Jose
Gino for like
Iglesias still out there?
I think so.
Yeah,
But yeah, and maybe that's an avenue that they take that we're not talking about. Maybe there's a free agent out there who makes sense still. So yeah, it's I think Moran is at least an average bat, and it's weird to be excited about an average bat, but when I look at the Mariners lineup right now, that's what it needs.
mm,
It needs just a 100 WRC plus placeholder while we wait and see what Kelnick is, where we wait and see what Pollock is, where we wait and see, I guess, what Marlowe is, what
sure. Yeah.
Trammell is. Like, there are other guys there who could be an above average bat, but to start the year, I want just safety at least out of that DH spot, and to me,
Mm.
that's Moran. But if Scott says it's Marlowe, if Jerry says it's Marlowe, if Justin says it's Marlowe, then I think at some point you just have to kind of trust their judgment on this and you roll with it. And again, you don't have to. It's not a long term thing, right? You don't have to commit to Cade Marlowe long term. You could just
Mm.
give it a shot for a couple weeks, see what happens, and roll with it, roll from there. But I do think that they're also going to have to start looking outside the org. I don't think they can just be complacent with what they have and say the answer will definitely come from within. I don't think they can make that claim.
So let's get into that because, again, I asked in follow up if this meant maybe the Mariners could look back out on the trade market. And let me try to scroll up here into my messages and see if I can get exactly what our source said. No, I'll just paraphrase. So essentially, what I was told was that, or this was the exact response that I got was there's a growing confidence in Mariners camp that Chris Flexen's going to be traded before opening day. So that's really interesting, right? For a couple of reasons. The first, I mean, we've talked about how much having, Flexen as depth, kind of a fallback option, keeping him in the bullpen, maybe having him spot start here and there. We've talked about, Marco Gonzalez might have to go on paternity leave at some point in April. So, maybe Flexen will have to make a spot start there. And so, the other thing too is, can you get a bat for him? Can you get a bench bat? Can you get someone that essentially replaces Tommy La Stella's spot on this roster for, a year of Chris Flexen? Does he actually hold that kind of value for you where you can get a valuable, major league position player that essentially outweighs the value of keeping someone like Chris Flexen around? So the other thing too, right, is we talked about this a few episodes ago. Jason Churchill, friend of the show, on his podcast, Baseball Things, on Patreon, has talked about how the Mariners have been apparently reaching out to teams about starting pitching, and not necessarily, all-star caliber starting pitching, but guys that would maybe fit on the back end of their rotation. So to me, if I'm just kind of trying to put two and two together here, if what Church is hearing is correct and what our source is hearing is correct, then maybe the plan is for the Mariners to go out, get a starting pitcher. Who knows how that impacts Marco Gonzalez in this whole thing? That's a whole nother conversation to have. But they go out, they get another starting pitcher, and then they trade Flexen, or vice versa. They trade Flexen first, and then go out and get the starting pitcher. That makes quite a bit of sense.
Right.
What do you make of all of this?
I think, it's a good question. I think it's about covering your bases more or less. You want to make sure that if you do trade Chris Flexen, you have this backup plan, right? And you have this comfort level in knowing that, well, we may be trading Flexen, but we do have this viable major league starter. And, it's worth noting that we were not told that what pitchers they were asking about. We did not hear that. But we were told, as all of Jason's podcast listeners were, we don't have any special insight here, that they're major league quality arms. They're not looking at like 4A types. They're looking for legitimate major league starters, back end guys. So I think it's more about, hey, look, if we have to make a move, with flex, right? If we we can get to a move we like with flex, then we can make this trade comfortably. So I think you're right. I think it is more about like, hey, we think we can trade flex for this, but we don't want to do it until we've backed ourselves up with a viable big league option that isn't like Bryce Miller or Taylor Dollard or Emerson Hancock. So I think it's probably a bit about that, but I think it's just value, right? Like, let's sniff around, let's see what
Right.
happens. And by the way, if you get to a point where you do acquire that back end guy and he starts pitching well for you or whatever, maybe you get to a point where you get into June, July, and you are willing all of a sudden to move Bryce Miller because of this guy that you picked up, and you feel good about the back end of your rotation. So
Mm,
I think it's mostly just covering our bases. Let's just make sure that we have enough pitching so that if we do trade flex and if Marco does struggle, we're not rushing these young guys up to the big leagues. Um, and if the arm that we identify works out and he's pitching better than a number 5 starter, then all of a sudden we can trade, Dollard or
right.
Hancock or Miller for, something that could help us more at the plate. So I think it's more about that than
Right.
anything else.
And maybe even if they don't get a supplementary arm and they trade flex, and maybe that's a signal that they think that Miller might be ready by May or so. That they feel pretty confident about that. And obviously he's had a pretty decent start to spring and obviously garnered a lot of
Right.
attention. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. It's gonna be really interesting to see kind of just how this whole roster shakes out. Because it just like it going into spring, we talked about this when we did our roster projections, that it felt like everything was pretty much chalk, more or less.
Yeah.
Especially like in the bullpen, right? Because there's just so many guys that are more or less locked in there. But maybe if Flexen gets traded, right? And they don't have a supplementary arm there, maybe that opens up the door for someone like Perlander Baroa to make the bullpen out of the gate. And I was told by our source that they are very high on Baroa, that they're pretty much equally as excited about Baroa as they've been about Marlowe. But I was also at the same time told that our source still feels that Justin Topa and Trevor Gott still have the inside track on that final spot in the bullpen.
Right.
But again, if Flexen is gone, they don't add a supplementary arm, that's another spot that opens up in that bullpen, and there you go. Now Baroa or Topa essentially are competing for that final spot.
Right. It's probably going to go to Topa
Yeah.
at that point. But again, there's still 18 to 20 odd games left to go in the Cactus League even. So
Yeah.
there's still injuries that can occur. There are other smaller trades. For all we know, the Mariners they end up trading Penn Murphy and not Chris Flexen, like something
Yeah.
like that's possible. So
Mm-hmm.
especially if they're looking for kind of a major league bat. We're going to start to hear more about players who are out of options and don't look like they're going to make their team. And those guys are going to be appealing for a team like Seattle, who has at bats to give. Two guys that, in the limited amount of time I did some research on this, two guys that kind of make some sense to me, not perfect sense, but Lamont Wade Jr. of the Giants, late night Lamont, big time, clutch base hits, but he really struggled last year, and he's more of a platoon bat, but he is a strong
And
side.
the Mariners
platoon.
and Giants love making trades with
They
one another around this time of year.
they do, and judging by what they gave up to get Baroa and what they gave up to get Tom Murphy a few years ago, you could probably get Wade for
Me.
Yeah, I mean, I do that, sure. So yeah,
Trade me to
especially
Locked On Giants.
right. Unfortunate for Ben, but unfortunately, the one thing that kind of maybe is not making that likely is that Austin Slater looks like he's going to start the year on the IL for the Giants, and
Mhm.
Donovan Walton is going to start the year on the IL. So there's kind of two open spots on that roster. So feels like Wade's probably going to make that roster, but we'll see. That's definitely a guy that you can check on. And ironically enough, we do know that one of the teams that the Mariners are asking about their pitching is, I have no idea how to structure the sentence,
Sure.
is
I'm
the
following you.
Giants or is the National League West team. Well, the Giants and the Mariners make a lot of trades, so
Right.
naturally it kind of leads to that assumption. So maybe it's Wade and a pitcher that they like for
Mm.
you know nothing. um, the
A ham sandwich,
I mean,
a coupon to Pizza Hut.
the coupon to Pizza Hut is going to be more valuable than whatever they traded Tom Murphy for. So, um, and the other guy who I like the player, but I mean, we talk, man, and we're going to criticize Cade Marlowe for strikeouts. Keston Hira, oh man,
Yeah,
that dude somehow struck out like 40% of the time last year and still posted a 115 WRC plus.
really.
Yes,
That's crazy.
I mean, look it up, man. Like seriously, go look at the numbers right now. You will be blown away. You look at his slash line, you look at the strikeout rate, and you'll go,
I'm doing that right now. Hold on.
and we'll go, what? He did what? But he is out of options. He's a former first round pick. We know how much Jerry loves those guys. Really first base DH type, but he can play second if you need him to. And yeah, he's just never really found his footing in Milwaukee.
Wow. Listen to this. All right.
Yeah.
So Keston Hira, not to get super sidetracked here, but like he played 80 games last year, 266 plate appearances. Like Colby said, struck out 41.7%, 8.6 walk percentage. He slashed 226, 316, 449, which is good for a 115 WRC plus, 14 home runs, 32 ribs, 5 stolen bags. That is one of the wildest stat lines I've ever seen in my entire life. 41 point. He's striking out 42% of the time, and he's posted a 115 WRC plus. How is that possible? How are you nearly striking out half of the time you go up to bat, and you're posting a 115 WRC plus? That makes no sense.
Kind of intrigues you though, doesn't it? Because like, if I can get that down to like 30% even, like,
yeah,
because that's a lot of power for a guy who strikes out.
Is Fangraphs broken or something? Like this can't be possible. Like I'm looking at this and it's breaking my brain.
Think about how bad Jesse Winker was last year, and understand he had like a 106 WRC plus. So
true, but I mean, he also walked like 18% of the time. Like,
well, what did Hero walk? I'm sure it was a lot, right?
8.6.
Oh, okay, so a little bit above league average. I think league average is 8.1.
That's still wild. That's wild.
It is. I can't explain it. I looked it up. But yeah, he's out of options. He is making a little bit of money this year, $2 million. The Brewers, I don't want to say they don't have room for him. They do, but he's not the type of guy that you just keep on your roster no matter what, right? Like,
right, yeah.
If a better opportunity comes, and he's only 26, and like I mentioned, former top prospect, former first round pick. We know Jerry loves those type of guys. And obviously there is, surprisingly, with a career 36% strikeout rate, there is still value in that bat because he's also a career 105 WRC plus guy. So yeah, I can't really explain it either. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever way
I think you might have discovered one of the craziest stat lines in baseball history. Like,
I mean, because like here's the deal, right? 226 batting average is about 5 or 6 points below league average. So essentially league average in the grand scheme of things. 316 on base, that is about league average. I think league average is 312. At least last year it was. And then the 449 slugging, that's well above league average. I think league average is 425 or something like that.
Yeah.
So essentially it's an average slash line with 42% strikeout
is wild too, because he only had 23 total extra base hits, with 14 of those being home runs.
Right, but only 266 plate appearances.
True. Good point. Yeah.
So yeah, the profile doesn't scream control the zone, right? I mean, you can't. I think I said this. Yes, you can't strike out 40% of the time and be a good hitter in Major League Baseball. Well, Keston Hira is
putting that to the test.
Apparently, Keston Hira is the
exception to the rule.
The exception to the rule, yeah. Because I don't get it. I imagine his I didn't look at his Statcast page, but I imagine it's littered in red. I mean, there's no way he has to be hitting the ball extremely hard all the time. When he's not striking out.
Yeah, when he's actually making contact. All right, let's see here. I'm gonna load up Keston Hira's Savant page real quick. It's loading. We're loading. We're doing the loading thing. It's still loading, and he didn't register enough to really put any percentile rankings on his page. He was 72nd percentile in max exit velocity, which 54th percentile in sprint speed. Yikes. First percentile in arm strength. And that's it.
Yeah. Shoot off that page. It's starting to do that clicky thing on the audio version.
There we go.
So fingers crossed I didn't carry
Fingers
through
crossed
the
it
entire
didn't
episode.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what
if
happened
you guys
to
are
us
hearing
last,
this conversation, then it didn't.
Yeah, that's what happened to us yesterday. We were recording, or we recorded our whole episode. It didn't sound like that at all on either one of our sides. And then we played the episode back. It was just click, 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 click.
Yep.
No idea. And then we did it again, and it was fine. So I have no idea what happened.
By the way, Hira reverse split guy is actually better against righties than he is lefties. So there you go. If you're worried about a platoon guy, he's the reverse split guy. So he's a righty who hits righties very well. Well, not very well, but he hits them better than lefties.
Sure.
But he's going to run in some home runs, and I don't. Like I said, I don't know how he did it. But Castanero was a good hitter last year, despite striking out 42% of the time. Like Jared Kelnick looks at that strikeout percentage and blushes. Like, holy cow, that's something, man. And that's not an outlier either. Look at his career strikeout rates; they're all high. Not that high, but they're all very high. So
no, it's still like 36%, 37%, something like that. Yeah. He's still striking.
I don't know if Hero is going to fit the mold that they're looking for, but he is a guy without options who has produced in the big leagues that does have some club control and would be relatively cheap to acquire.
Gotcha.
So,
all right. Let's hop off of here before some other technical issue happens, because I think this was a pretty good episode. I hope you guys agree. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DaneGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well at Locked On Mariners. Again, that is one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like us, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.